Thank you for listening to Lone Star Community Radio. This program was broadcasted and recorded live from the LSCR studios in downtown Conroe, Texas. Lone Star Community Radio is supported by listeners like you. Donate and sponsor today. For more information on getting involved with Lone Star Community Radio, contact us at lscrstudios@gmail.com or visit us online at www.irlonestar.com.
All right, you're listening to Crime Scene Today, where we talk about current issues facing law enforcement, crime scene, and forensics. Today I have Zack and Kowalske. Yes, that's correct?
Yeah.
Okay, that's proper pronunciation. I should know that. I'm Polish too.
Yeah, right, cool.
But
Good North German Polish name.
So we are at ACER again, Association of Crime Scene Reconstruction. And last time we were here, we interviewed Tom Bevel, and he talked about the history of ACER. And actually, Zack has written a book, just got released a couple weeks ago, called Gaming the Reaper. And we were coming to this conference. I reached out to him so that we could have this conversation. But actually, on a side note, I have not done the podcast a little bit. Just life gets crazy and things happen. And, it was actually a conversation with you and some of the things that you hit on in your book as far as sort of pushing forward, putting other things aside, those type of things, right? We're going to talk about some of that, but it also encouraged me to get back on this, on the main reason on why it was created, which was to have a voice from our community and representation there. So I guess a little bit, Zack, just, I know you, but briefly, who you are, like what you do for a living, right?
So my name is Zack Kowalske. I'm a detective in the Metro Atlanta area assigned to a crime scene unit. I've been there for a little over 14 years, and I specialize in crime scene reconstruction, so bloodstain pattern analysis and shooting reconstruction. Outside of that, I'm a PhD researcher with Staffordshire University, where my dissertation research is in bloodstain pattern analysis and looking at uncertainty associated with that. Involved with ACER and IBPA, and then I'm also a member on the NIST-OSAC bloodstain subcommittee. So I got a few pokers and a few irons in the fire.
Okay, now, last time we were at ACER, and that was in Colorado. Oh, you had a project. I know that you were leaving. You had blood in your hand. We didn't question why. You had some blood. You were leaving the conference.
Not abnormal for a BPA guy to have blood.
And so you were heading out, and you were going to go and do something at Estes Park in the snow. So what was going on with your research there?
Yeah. So part of my Let me backtrack. So my PhD research is looking at how accurate our estimations of area of origin and angle of impact are in BPA based off of environmental conditions. So as part of that, looking at how blood deposits and looks on abnormal surfaces that we find in a common environment. So concrete, I did say, we're here at the beach this week. Sand was one of those. Snow was one of my environments. So then, bless you, there was fire and air currents, and then did some zero-G work as well. But for Estes Park, that was my snow environment, where basically looking at how accurate is our estimation of those stain, shape, size, and distribution patterns in snow. Because snow is not only permeable, it can collapse, and stains can change in size because of that permeability.
So some things, just so I have a understanding of it. So I know going through bloodstain, you do different angles of impact and how that looks, and based on how that looks and with the measurements determining angle. So is that sort of what you're looking at in the snow to see if that's similar to everything else we've dropped it on, wood and tile and whatnot?
Yeah, absolutely. So let me boil it down to this. The main question is, how does the environment affect the size of that stain? That very specific ratio that we're looking at of that length and width, right? And does it change from environment to environment? Well, what I found is that yes, it does. Is that surface roughness of the substrate has a direct impact on how, at kind of that microscopic level, how that blood stain forms from the rim formation and distribution when it makes contact with it. So it's changing its actual size and that ratio based off of that surface, which in turn directly affects our angle calculations and angle of impact calculations, and in turn affects our area of origin. What I have found is that area of convergence, that two-dimensional kind of estimation, is fairly robust because you're looking mainly at directionality of stains, and that's still there.
And just as far as sort of layman's of area of origin and area of convergence, so how we use this in a reconstruction is to determine...
Yes, so angle of impact, let me break down the three main terms, right? So angle of impact, that is the angle at which a liquid blood drop strikes a surface. So that, if you look at a cross-section, the angle that it's going to strike at, right? That allows us to backtrack at that specific angle. Area of convergence is the two-dimensional, only the X and Y plane of where did that blood originate from. So if we're looking at a stain pattern, if I beat you in the head right now with your microphone, where was your head in two-dimensional space? So if we were looking at it from an overhead perspective. But we're a very three-dimensional observers, right? So we then apply area of origin, and that's where we're combining the area of convergence along with our angle of impact. And we get that Z plane, that height, where we can apply that third dimension, and that's where we can start estimating where your head was in three-dimensional space.
Right. So we've used this many times to refute statements, different evidence to try to corroborate
Absolutely.
what people are saying. So that's just one of the reconstruction dynamics there. Now, you mentioned zero gravity. Okay, so this is a unique area and test. So you're the only one who has done this?
Yes. So this was the first forensic-based research of looking at blood stain pattern analysis in a microgravity or a zero gravity environment. This is my favorite story because it started with a, hey, I have a crazy idea kind of concept. I'm a huge space nerd. I'm a huge science nerd.
So if a crime scene occurred on the space station.
Yeah, on the ISS.
Yes, so you're ready now.
Yeah,
right?
100%.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. We are good to go. I have a great understanding at this point of how liquid blood behaves in a zero gravity environment or a microgravity environment. But yeah, it started with I'm a huge space nerd, and I had read an article many years ago in a magazine that was hypothesizing how forensic science would be in the future and in space. And when I was reading the BPA or the bloodstain part, it was wrong. Everything that I knew about fluid dynamics, it was wrong. And I was like, that's not how that would work. And that got me on this thought experiment of how it actually would work. And so as I entered my PhD, that was something I wanted to kind of understand even more, right? And it tied in very well with kind of isolating blood behavior in flight and its accuracy. So I was able to get in touch with a researcher, Dr. George Panelos out of University of Louisville's Cardiovascular Innovation Institute. And he is a researcher in conjunction with NASA and some of their flight programs. And so we were able to do some cool parabolic flights. And
so how do you pull this off? Is this like the plane that goes up and immediately dies?
Yep, the vomit comet. Yeah, it is. So it is out of their microgravity program. He is he's a researcher in cardiovascular, so he looks at hemorrhage and hemorrhage control and hemorrhage reduction in microgravity, because that's really important, right? If we have a catastrophic accident on the ISS or something like that, where somebody needs emergency surgery, we need to understand how bleeding and hemorrhaging occurs in that environment, right? So I just kind of tagged along and modified, boiled down my experiment to a very bare bones to look at just very specific aspects of blood behavior. And he was pretty awesome. He
So what was the general finding? So what did you find?
General
compared to gravity versus zero gravity?
So surface tension is the driving factor in the absence of gravity. Surface tension is key, and how it affects the deposition of stains and interacting with other surfaces. So where you think of right now, if you take a droplet of water or a droplet of blood and you drop it on a surface here, it's going to spread out and it's going to dry very thin, right? We're going to see a flat stain. Whereas in a microgravity environment, you don't have gravity to cause it to completely disperse. So there is this inhibition of that gravitational spread. So what you end up with is a tiny little dome. So there's actually a retraction that happens. So that stain is actually not the correct size that we would normally associate it with. So we again see what I went into it thinking one thing and ended up with a result that was completely different. And that's the cool thing about science, right, is that you end up with this result of, right? And I wonder why that is. And then you start diving even more into it, and then you understand, oh, this is why. This is a very natural physical force that we experience here. Just how it affects in a microgravity environment truly makes you appreciate it better terrestrially. So by understanding how blood reacts in the absence of gravity, we can better understand it in the presence of 1G.
Now, along with that, you mentioned that you had done some fire research and stuff, and sort of one of those aha moments that you spoke about before. You found some other things that you were not intended, wasn't part of the exercise.
Yeah, absolutely. I said it earlier this week. The best thing in science is not to say eureka; it's to say, that's funny. And I totally had that's funny moment when I was doing the hyperthermal and fire environment. So what it was is we made a series of drops and then a series of impact patterns, and then we introduced fire, either direct fire application or a hyperthermal high heat environment, and understanding how the different processes that blood goes through during that exposure. And ultimately what happens is blood dehydrates and starts a retraction process, but it doesn't really affect the stain shape and size. The original stain, it can still be observed, so we can still apply those exact same principles, reconstruction principles. So fire doesn't affect our calculations and reconstruction as long as the stain is still there, and stains are pretty tough when it comes to fire. What I did notice is that during that dehydration process, you have a hyperthermal retraction of cellular material in the center of the stain, and it basically gives you characteristics. I'm going to boil this down. It gives you characteristics of which direction the fire or the heat was exposed to. Yeah, where the source was. So we can now tie that into fire investigations and arson investigations to understand area of origin of fire, right? Based off of bloodstain patterns. So we're using one forensic discipline to complement another forensic discipline. And that was a really cool characteristic to see and kind of determine.
Now, you're more towards the end of your research on this, but is there other things you're still doing in reference to your doctorate, to your PhD?
Yeah, so at this point, data collection is done. It's a matter of synthesizing everything. The last trial was finished up at the beginning of the year, and that was where we take a series of different samples of varying surface roughness, and really dialing into isolating that angle of impact to determine an offset to try and correct the formula based off of that. Still working my way through that data and synthesizing all that information, but it looks pretty promising. I'm hoping to be done with this whole PhD stuff by the end of the year, and definitely a shout out to Staffordshire University on that one.
But now, aside from that, and I understand this is for your education and whatnot, but you've always been a researcher. You've always looked for answers. You've always put together projects, experiments to find answers. And I guess to a point, by definition, that's what reconstruction is, and putting things together to try to find out what happened. And so, what's your next research? What's the next thing that you feel is important that you want to try to tackle?
Oh yeah, so one of the cool things, or I guess byproducts, when you're doing a long research program like a PhD, is you come up with other ideas, right? As you get kind of in the weeds on something, you're like, oh, I should totally do this too. but I don't have time, right? It's all about, once again, prioritizing the priorities. So there's a few things that I kind of want to dive into. The next thing, I kind of want to step over towards the shooting incident reconstruction component and look at uncertainty associated over there. I know that there's some really great researchers out there that are doing something very similar. I know like Eugene Lischio up at University of Toronto. He's really looked at a bunch of that, has had some recent papers coming out. There's not a whole lot of published research as much as BPA in the shooting reconstruction side. So I'd like to see more research on the shooting reconstruction side. And really just the crime scene reconstruction discipline as a whole, right? And really kind of diving into methodology that is applied in CSR. CSR being crime scene reconstruction. Sorry, I'm trying not to use acronyms. But BPA is really hard. As you've listened to this, I apologize. BPA is blood stain power analysis, and it just has a bad habit.
I mean, it's just normal around police. We have all acronyms, crime scene and whatnot. I think some of the worst are when you get to your federal agencies and you get a report that has this acronym, that acronym. I mean, they should have a sheet behind it.
Yeah, you need a glossary at the end, right? To understand each one.
So, all right. So you wrote a book. Is this the first book you've written?
It is. So
we have Gaming the Reaper.
Yep, Gaming the Reaper.
Okay. How to win at life and optimize the well, on the podcast we said out of your own potential. So how'd this come about? So what's
this came about? It was a weekend in November, December, somewhere around there. I think it was November, where I was kind of in a slump of working on my dissertation. If anyone who has been through the laborious process of either a master's thesis or the years upon years that a PhD will suck the life out of you, you end up in this it's called the mid-years slump, and it's where you're trying to get that energy to just.
Yeah, it's about endurance.
Yeah, it is 100% about endurance. And I needed to get back in the habit of writing. I've always loved writing. And I have always really enjoyed the concepts of like leadership and really self-development. And I love lists. I love like those silly top 5 ways to maximize your financial health, or the top 10. I love top lists, right? Because it's always interesting how people prioritize things and prioritize their personal growth and development. And so that's where this stupid book came from. It was a side project that I just kind of started writing and expanding on. I did get asked here recently whether or not I used ChatGPT or any kind of like copywriting AI. So I am a AI fanboy. I absolutely love AI. I did not use AI because I didn't know that AI was around until about 6 weeks ago. Yeah. And I totally wish I had known about it then. But no, this was something that it's 50-something pages. And it was a weekend write for me, right? It got me back into the habit. And once I started going, so that's kind of typically how my brain works, is I have a complete brain dump and I start doing research as I go along to help expand on certain topics that I'm wanting to talk about. And so I wrote this thing over the course of really kind of about a week. And it's kind of a top 10 of really the best practices on how to optimize your time and how to maximize your potential and be a high achiever, right? I'm constantly enamored and look up to key role models over history. So I love biographies, and I'm constantly kind of working my way through different biographies. So I look at character traits that each one of my big role models have, whether it's like Musk or Teddy Roosevelt or Walt Disney. I think that I've read probably just about every biography and business-related book on Walt Disney, because if you look at what they have built, there wasn't anything really special or unique to them. It was all this dogged determination. And based off of a lot of experiences in my life within my law enforcement career, dogged determination is something I'm very passionate about, and that concept of endurance.
And you even broke it apart, I'd say, in the book of talking about things that I think you refer to them as great achievers or something of that nature, and basically things that are common among the great achievers. What are things that can stop you, things that propel you, and these things. So, in looking at people like Roosevelt, Musk, and Disney, so what do you say is sort of a common thread that you see along all those biographies and such?
They don't take no for an answer. Like, legitimately, that's probably, I think, the biggest thing is that they are so 100% in tune with what their vision is that it doesn't really matter what the naysayers say. And once you can completely commit, that's, I think, the biggest thing is completely commit 100%, and know that you're in it for the long run, you can achieve just about anything. It's whether or not you have the endurance to do it and the willpower to actually not take no for an answer and keep trying and keep trying and keep trying. No matter how big. I did space research and bloodstain pattern analysis, all because I had the crazy idea of cold calling basically a NASA researcher, and then had a communication with him that led to a communication and networking it, and just didn't take no for an answer. I didn't expect that to happen.
So now, when most people, I would say the most common excuse that I hear in that type of scenario, right? I want to try something, I want to do something, whatever, is I don't have time, right?
I don't have time.
I don't have time to do this, right? And both of us, we have busy lives and things, wherever. So, what's the time suck? What is the basically, how do you get over?
Yeah, there are so many great, so the first way and the biggest way to get over that time suck excuse basically is don't let yourself give excuses. If you know you need to be working on something, then stay up as late as you need to finish it. It is all about self-discipline. I think in the book I talk about, and you've heard me say it a few times because it really is something that's important to me, is prioritizing your priorities, right? So in crime scene, we do it all the time. We can be working a major case and we have a whole list of tasks that we know we need to get accomplished for a scene. And that list may start in a certain fashion of having task 1, 2, 3, and 4. But as you progress through that investigation, we get new information or details and variables change to where 4 may now be the most important thing that I need to get done right now, right? And so my list is going to change its order. It's that kind of a living document, if you will, or a living list to where you're constantly kind of changing your priorities. This is something that Einstein actually did, right? So he would take his life and he'd separate it into columns. And in each column, so it would be like work, it'd be personal, and it'd be like, career goals. And he would list out everything that he was doing or needed to do. And then he would pick one from each column and work specifically on that until it was done. And then you go to the next one, and then you go to the next one. And it's working the list. And if you work your life like that, you'll accomplish every single goal, task. But within that, obviously things are going to change, priorities are going to change. So you have to be able to kind of move that list around. But once you started a topic, you got to finish a topic, right? It may take you a long time, and you may you find what works for you. There are a lot of really good kind of books out there. I'm a big fan of Tim Ferriss and like the 4-Hour Work Week. And some of the different traits you kind of pull from that, talking like the 80-20 rule. I know you actually were talking about the 80-20 rule earlier today in your presentation. So,
yeah, I mean, there's certain things that, we refer to them as derailers, right? I mean, so you have a plan, you have your list, right? And it is, I mean, when you start scratching things, there's an accomplishment to that too, right? I mean, you get, it's that, chemistry, release, feedback, that you've accomplished something. Right?
Yeah, so there is something really gratifying about putting a line through an item. My wife does it all the time. And I'm going to totally give her some major kudo credit here, is she lives in lists. She lives in lists and calendars, and she has only made me better over the years. I am as successful in the different things that interest me because of her. I picked up my love of lists from her. So Jennifer, thank you for that. But yeah, there is not only that self-gratification about it, right? But yeah, it's chemistry, right? You're giving yourself that gold star.
Right. And again, sort of back to the whole derailer thing, it's things are going to come up without a doubt. I mean, that's just life, right? And it's trying to get back on track as quick as possible. Because I think that the longer you're away from it, the longer that you are not doing the project, it's much easier to keep pushing it to the back burner, to the cabinet, to the garage.
If you're listening to this right now, you cannot see the fact that I'm completely shaking my head. For the same reason that this book came out is, right, I hadn't worked on my dissertation in 3 months. And every month that goes by is another month that I am contributing to the fine fund of the university, right? So I wanted to get it done.
Well, I would also say that it adds stress to you, right? I mean, when you have something that you want to do, that you've set to accomplish, and now you set a goal, you put a list, whatever, now when you're not doing it, okay, you have guilt, you have stress, you have extra things on top of you, right? I mean, not to discourage, like, well, if I don't have a list, I don't have that, right? No, that says no.
No, but it's glaring at you, right? Like it's the guilt, it's that self-guilt, that's the best way. And that is kind of in one part where you're never going to be perfect in any of this, right? You have to be willing to forgive yourself to a point, but then it comes back to that self-discipline of, all right, I forgive you to this point, but seriously, dude, you got to start working on that. And just going and doing, and really, at least for me, once I start working on it, it's an energy dump. And I will spend, like, if it's a project in the garage that I'm working on, it's going to get done, right? Because at that point, I'm cooking. I'm going down what did Chelly say? It's super easy to get a train going down the tracks, but it's really hard to back it up, right? And same thing, once you get going, you get going.
Now, as far as the other tips, other things that you found, and I know that you've pulled from many leadership lessons, and one thing that nearly all good leaders do is it's a continuing, lifelong education, right? It's lifelong learning. It's following other people, and and you had mentioned it earlier as we've been talking, about a vision and having that there has to be some type of goal, mission, vision of what you're trying to accomplish.
What's the destination?
With all of it, and then setting those type of priorities, as you say, right? So I guess for someone that wants to do something, right? I mean, they sort of just have this idea, as you say, right? What would you tell them? How do you get started, right? I mean, what's the outline? What's the game plan to, like, from that?
Yeah, so everyone's kind of a little bit differently, but I think the concept remains the same, and that is visualizing it, right? So there's a concept called vision boards that I know a lot of people use, and that's where if you have an idea and you're trying to kind of really conceptualize it, they'll cut out magazine or newspaper, or they'll put graphics onto basically a collage, right? And so there are these
like
vision
serial killer notes, right?
Yeah, exactly, like serial killer notes, 100%. Cut out the R from one, cut out the O from another. It's gonna look great. Yeah. Just gonna be my special little project. I don't really work like that. I'm a writer, so I want to write it out, and so I like to diagram. So I kind of put my vision or my goal in one place, and I start putting like a flow chart, if you will, or a tree of all the things that might be associated with that I need to accomplish to get to that, and then how do I accomplish each one of those. So it ends up kind of being almost like a link tree of different it's a map, right? So no vision is ever going to be accomplished on a one-way street. You are always going to have to take detours and routes, and it's never a straight shot. You're going to learn along the way. The biggest thing is make a decision, and then you can course correct along the way. Because then you at least have motion. And once you have that motion, it's Newton's law of inertia. So that's kind of a few different processes. I like to diagram stuff out.
So now, one thing that you talk about, and it's common among many leadership books and lessons in leadership, even though it's, everybody will talk about vision, everybody will talk about, taking care of others and supporting others, and all those are very important, right? But all of them will also mention, and you've touched on, is taking care of yourself, right?
Absolutely.
As far as making sure that, having that time comes with you being healthy. And we're just not talking about just not, sick, cough type thing, right? But I mean, to be in a situation physically and mentally capable of operating at your optimum performance, right?
Yeah.
And, actually you discussed in one of your presentations while here, I think one thing that's dismissed most often is sleep.
Right? Yeah, so, absolutely. Sleep changed my life.
So as you're staying up with these projects, as you're pushing yourself, I think that's like the first thing that we dismiss, right?
Yeah.
That's the first thing that goes is, well, I'll sleep 2-3 hours. And especially, crime scene homicide, it's nearly accepted. Like when you come in, that's going to
it's almost expected,
right?
Even.
That's your life, right?
It's expected that you are going to be here for the long haul. We're going to work this until you catch the bad guy. And to a point, right, is sleep, apart from the physiological component of it, right? So your body has to sleep. That's how your body repairs itself. That is how your chemistry it constantly resets itself. So you have to physically have sleep. Otherwise, eventually your body will tell you, guess what? We're sleeping now, because you're going to have this crash, right? But let's talk about the stress component of that, right? So the more that you're awake, and you're going to become more dull, right? You have a slower response, so your cognition starts to be impaired. I believe it was maybe in the 90s. Don't quote me on this. Many years ago, because I can't cite you the specific study. Army did a study, right? And I remember we had the chart posted in our police department for the longest time. But it was a study that equated sleep deprivation to the blood alcohol content level in DUIs, right?
Yep.
And it was after 24 hours of no sleep, you were that of, if not more than a 0.08, which is the legal limit, at least in the state of Georgia. I'm sure it's probably kind of similar. Pretty common around the country. So after 24 hours of being up, you have the same cognitive impairment as if you were impaired by alcohol, right? Whether that is the depression of your cognition itself, like in being able to make rational decisions, or just in slow muscular response and stuff like that.
Well, and I think that's a great correlation, because, and we learned this when we're dealing with drunks, when you start patrol, right, is, they take a shower, they do coffee. What do you have? You just have an awake drunk. Well, yeah. Correlating that to crime scene and homicide is, let's say it's exciting what we do.
Absolutely. I'm on a high, right?
So you have this adrenaline rush. You're going after the guy, and you're finding all this. And you want to get to this next witness and next thing and process this, and all of this excitement, right? And it keeps you going, right? Nearly to a false sense, because you think you're still operating optimum, right?
Yeah.
And the problem, and no different, I've experienced the same, is, you're up for 2 days. Well, now you find the guy, right? Now you have to interview this person, and you've been up for 2 days, right? So
you really think you're at your peak game after 48 hours to go talk to a murder suspect?
Right.
I'm going to guess probably not there, bud.
Yeah, so, we have teams. Obviously, we split up, right, that and other, right? But again, I think that's common, and we I know there were many times that, because the other part, there's a crash coming.
Oh yeah. And it's cultural, right? It's one of those like, how long were you up yesterday, right? It's like almost a contest.
Right. There's a badge. You went home?
You went home? Yeah.
Home?
I stayed here all night.
I mean, I went home at 5. I'm back here at 6, right? I mean, I got 30 minutes rest and we're ready to go.
In reality, you're an idiot, right? Because you can't possibly do your case justice by, you have to take care of yourself just as much to really provide the best service, right? And we get back to that concept of being the best version of yourself. And that's not just a lifelong goal, but short-term goals too, right? The short-term goals of being the best version of yourself with sleep.
Yeah, I can tell you that it's much easier to back off, secure the area, and for one, take care of others on your team, right? There's a team concept. There's others that can do many things for you, right? For you to have that wellness. Certainly the next part, eating right, exercise, all those things, and living the homicide.
All the less fun stuff.
But living the homicide and crime scene life, if you think meal prep is hard for just normal stuff, right?
Yeah. You wouldn't talk about living that detective diet.
What can be delivered to the scene, right? What burger place can be run?
I legit had my partner, God bless him, he once had he Ubered Uber Eats at a crime scene. And the look on the Uber Eats driver was hilarious, but that was the only way that you're really gonna get good food, right? Because we may be out on a scene for 16 hours during one day before you decide, hey, all right, let's call it a day. Let's go home and get at least 6, if not 8 hours, and come back at it. Because I can tell you, I worked the nights for a long part of my career, and I had a trash diet, as most law enforcement do. We're notorious about having a trash diet of that, what I can get to go quickly, right? So fast food, roller food at the local racetrack, Quick Trip, whatever convenience store, and that is all terrible on your body. Now, don't get me wrong, I am not a health food nut. I eat anything I want, and I'm very fortunate for my metabolism.
Yeah.
It will catch up with me one day. I am completely aware of that. I think it's
for those listening, Zach probably has, 0% body fat. I mean, probably maybe 130 dripping wet. I'm not sure, but.
Yeah. But so that's all joking aside, but in eating trashy, it's how you like. I know when I eat trashy because I feel like crap. It has nothing to do with changing my BMI or gaining weight. It has everything to do with how it makes me feel, right? Because it's not good for you. So I try and make sure that I have some good food in me, and especially if I know that I'm going to have a long day at work, I really do actually prioritize having at least one good meal in there, because I might not get another good meal for the rest of the day.
So one thing that also beneficial on your projects, on your goals, and really sort of, again, how this podcast had come around is other resources, networking, and other people in the field, and pulling from them. It's not just about what we've learned, but knowing where to get that information, right?
Yep.
And finding that. So as you've taken on projects, where have you found, a great source of help and support?
Oh, absolutely. And you've heard me reference several names so far throughout our talk. And everyone that I mentioned is a subject matter expert in their field. So ACER, Association of Crime Scene Reconstruction, where we're here, with the beautiful sound of the ocean in the background. It's been a pretty phenomenal week. A little sleep deprived, not gonna lie, but that's because I'm having way too much fun. I look forward to ACER every year. Also, the IBPA, International Association of Bloodstain Pattern Analysts. Between those two organizations, you've got more than 1,000 members that are subject that are involved in either CSR or bloodstain, and it's through those networking functions and relationships that I have developed in those organizations that I end up being able to collaborate with other examiners or other researchers, or bounce ideas off of, or be out on a scene or be working a case and I have no idea and I need an answer to a question. I have several times either FaceTimed somebody or called somebody and said, hey, do you think this is possible? Or, I'm one of the biggest things, if you want to be successful in your career, is to be humble. I do not know everything. I can't possibly know everything. I'm very lucky I know what I know. So I know who to call, though, right? As I always say that when I'm teaching classes is, you can always call me. I may not have the answer, but I will know someone who does. And the reconstruction field is such a unique community and such a small community that we tend to know who we can call about something.
Well, and speaking about that community, so and we'll talk, briefly about two of those organizations that you mentioned. So, ACER, as we keep referring to it, which is the Association for Crime Scene Reconstruction. So we just finished our conference. As you said, we had some great people in attendance. We had some great instruction and had some workshops and whatnot. Next year, we are already planning the next year's conference. It normally happens around in February. So anybody listening that has interest in crime scene reconstruction, that is currently in the field, where to meet these people and such, we're going to be in Texas. We're going to be at Margaritaville in Conroe. I don't have the dates yet because we don't have the dates yet.
Yeah, it'd be sometime around February.
That's normally when it hits. So, and then BPA.
Yep. So IBPA, we are hosting. This is our 40th anniversary year. So our annual conference will be in Baltimore this year, and being 2023, and it's the week of October 9th. 2023 in Baltimore, and you can go to ibpa.org and see the conference information and registration on there.
So what typically is, obviously we're talking about blood stain pattern analysis, but what's typically that conference? So workshops, speakers,
It's a blend of everything. So very much you do have some workshops. It may be, so like last year we were in San Diego at Eugene. Lucio did a workshop on cast-off and documenting cast-off stain patterns. Scott Swick did an introduction on documentation of stain patterns in general. So you do have some workshops that may be a 1 or a 2-day workshop. It's typically a week-long conference, but you have a lot of either case studies or presentations on various topics.
So these are some of the, I don't know if I'll call them advanced, but they're very specific, discipline specific. But there are many disciplines that intermingle in those conversations.
Absolutely.
Right. So it's, there's multiple conversations happening, even if we're still talking crime scene reconstruction, still talking BPA.
And you don't have to be a practitioner to attend. You don't have to be a practicing bloodstain pattern analyst or reconstructionist to attend either one of these. If you're a student, we highly encourage. In fact, this week at ACER, we had 2 grad students presenting some research that they're doing as part of their master's. So we encourage students and anybody.
Even aside from the practitioners or the students, if you work crime scenes, if you do investigation,
absolutely,
right, it's just if one, you're learning what's out there, what other people do, or if it has an interest of you advancing your career, your knowledge, your experience in those areas, they're just great to attend.
Great example is this week we had one attendee who is not in law enforcement. She's not in crime scene. She's not a student. She works security, and she wants to get into the crime scene investigations field. So she came on her own because this is something that interests her, because it's something that she might have a passion for. Absolutely.
And that's a great way to test it out.
Absolutely, yeah.
Before you go through the process of becoming a crime scene investigator, going to school, learning everything, and then going to your first dead body and going, I don't.
Ooh, this might not be for me. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. That's a lot of money and time that spent wasted. So, but Zach, I appreciate your time. I appreciate you writing this book. I appreciate, honestly, all the research, advancement, your friendship, and your knowledge in crime scene, forensic discipline, and law enforcement in general. You're just a wealth of knowledge, and we just appreciate it.
Well, I appreciate it. Thanks for having me on. I always enjoy our conversations and had fun writing the book. And, for our listeners, Gaming the Reaper, it's available on Amazon and Kindle. And
I ordered one. It showed up, I think, like the next day. So, yep, just head on over to Amazon. Again, Gaming the Reaper by Zack Kowalske, and pick that up and listen further. We're going to have future conversations with Zack and other people that attended ACER. Certainly, if you have any questions, any topics that you would like to hear on Crime Scene Today, just shoot me an email, dan@crimescenetoday.com. Thanks for listening.